Let's move into the Dolphins being potentially the worst team in the NFL. They had the worst week one out of any of the teams in the NFL, and this feels like they're already looking towards next season. Now, is that actually the case, or is this a case of week one overreactions? What do you say?
Okay, going into
Go.
this season, right? Didn't have the highest of hopes for the Dolphins, right? Thought they were going to win more than their projected total 7.5 games, but there's reasonable cause for you to think otherwise, and I completely understood that. There was a lot of talking heads saying that this team could be really bad, and I kind of just brushed it to the side. That week one performance genuinely had me close to shedding a tear. That was some of the worst football I've ever. We just transitioned from one of the greatest games I've ever watched. As somebody who enjoys Dolphins football, as somebody who roots for this team, who grew up 3 minutes away from the stadium, who's rooted for this team since I knew what football was, I don't think I've watched a worse game than that. And I remember that week one loss where we lost 50 something to 8 against the Ravens. That game, there were so low expectations. It was a tank for 2 a year. I don't really care about that game. Everyone knew the Dolphins were going to be bad. There were at least some expectations coming into the season. It was so hard to watch, genuinely. That offensive line, we lost to Ron Armstead in the offseason. You could see it. Tua had no time in the pocket, and I understand he's a quick release guy. He can maybe get out at some of those. It was so bad. His QBR ended up being 2.7. His quarterback rating ended up being 51.7. Dude, he was 14 for 23, and that doesn't even sum up the whole of it. Those 14, a lot of those completions were either checkdowns or just plays made by the receiver. And he also had double the amount of interceptions as touchdowns. It was 2-1, so that's a little bit of an overstatement. But still, the interceptions didn't look good. He looked like Tua turned the ball over. He also had a fumble in this game, and it's the Colts. I host a show with a Colts fan who sits directly to my right, and I have to hear him rant about the Colts. Dude, the Colts are not supposed to be good this season at all. He genuinely had the lowest expectations of going into the season for the Colts, and rightfully so. They have Daniel Jones, their starting quarterback, and Anthony Richardson, who knows what Anthony Richardson is at this point as their starting quarterback. That team is not supposed to be good. The Miami Dolphins should have come into this game and genuinely had some sort of passion to win. And it just felt like the offseason. It felt like what we were getting when Mike McDaniels came up to the podium and he was just all sullen and talking about Tyreek Hill. It was just the worst thing ever. 2 drives into the game, Tyreek Hill's already throwing a fit. It was genuinely so hard to watch. And I'm hoping that this team could be good, but if they don't show me anything by week 3, it's gonna be tank for Arch time, because I don't know where you go from here. Tua and Mike McDaniels genuinely could get the boo after this season, and it's so sad because this offense is 2 years removed from being the best in the NFL. When Tua had led the NFL in passing yards, when Tyreek Hill almost hit 2,000 yards receiving, this team isn't that far removed from that. This team is 2 years removed from putting 70 points up against the Broncos. So the fall from grace for the Dolphins is so unfortunate, and being a Dolphins fan is just so depressing.
I think you covered everything for the Dolphins. I'll add one thing to it. I think that the post-game sound from this game was really unfortunate. A lot of different Colts DBs talking about, they were able just to see where Tua was going, and it was just not a good look. I just felt like the Colts had a good grasp. I mean, obviously, right, on the Dolphins offense, and that was worst case scenario for them. But I'll go give the Colts a little bit of credit here. I know not a lot of people are picking them to be very good this year, but since they signed Daniel Jones in the offseason, the one thing that the front office has said or did say was that it was going to be a quarterback battle. And I think a lot of people looked at it as an indictment on Anthony Richardson, and I'm not here to sell you stock on Daniel Jones, but I definitely think there's something to it that they knew, or they had a feeling that he was going to be their starter, or that it was going to be a very competitive quarterback battle so early. And they really showed out. They took advantage of all of the turnovers. They were able to put points on the board. And I believe there was a point that they hadn't done something since Peyton Manning, right, where they were able to score on all 4 of their possessions in the opening half. And they took advantage, and they really put it on the Dolphins. Now, looking ahead, I think there's a couple things here with the Dolphins. I do think that this, if it at all stays at around where it is, this is a coach and QB swap if I've ever seen one. I said it earlier and you just said it. I think that is a moment where we see Mike McDaniel get the boot, and it's done as far as the Tua era here for the Dolphins if this keeps it up, and we might see it midseason at a certain point, right? If it's this bad. And then also, I think it's so unfortunate because you mentioned 2 years ago, this offense was so great, and I just can't help but think that when it's all said and done with Tua, no matter how this season goes, we're going to look back at those concussions and his injuries and say that that's probably why things never picked up, or why these Dolphins teams never ended up being competitive late in the season. I don't want that to be too much of a cop-out because I understand Tua's had plenty of time to not have a game like this, and he was healthy last week. But I think that that's the way that I'm going to look at this, or his career, if this is really it, or if we've seen the best from them, because this really is a fall from grace. It's so unfortunate. Tyreek Hill looks so frustrated.
Yeah, and I just wanted to emphasize this point maybe a little bit more than I did when I first made it. It was part of the rambling that I was doing. Tua's QBR was 2.7. QBR is a scale from 0 to 100. It was 2.7. I don't know that I've ever seen obviously you look at some stat sheets and you look at QBRs and you've seen some pretty low ones. For perspective, Daniel Jones was 87.6. Daniel Jones by QBR played 43 times better than Tua Tagovailoa. That is obviously that's just an absurdity. Nobody's ever going to play 43 times better than somebody, but the fact that Daniel Jones was able to dice up this defense. Also, this defense was also just awful, but it wasn't even their fault really, because the offense just kept on letting the Colts have opportunities to score, and maybe that's an overstatement too, because the Colts didn't punt in the first half. They were genuinely they were able to do whatever they wanted on defense, but it was. The Dolphins defense has never been the staple of what we do. Last year they were fairly decent. It was one of the bright spots of the team. But you as an NFL fan, if your offense isn't playing well, it genuinely it makes it harder to watch the football games, right? This offense is so bad right now. Genuinely looks like they regressed from last year. And I don't even know how that's possible because it was so bad towards the end of last season. So I mean, I'm hoping that this was just a terrible week one and something can happen. And I'm holding out hope. I genuinely am. I am not putting it past the fact that maybe they can string some wins together here and maybe they can fight for a playoff spot. But over 7.5 wins might have been a stretch for me, and it might have been a long stretch if we look back at this towards the end of the season. And I'm just going to hope for the best, because wherever this heads, just on a personal note, I don't really like any of the quarterbacks coming out of this year's draft. So where am I as a Dolphins fan? I can only hope for good things.